Hello and welcome to the China Masterclass webinar. My name is Paul Sutton, and the theme for today's discussion is all about how to market and sell luxury property developments to investors in China and Asia. In case you're new to this series, it's part of the overall China Masterclass business webinar series, and our common theme is about how to build long-term trust, relationships, and value when doing business in China, and focusing in particular on the property sector. So before we introduce our special guest today, I'm going to hand over to Sally, who is our co-host. So Sally is an expert in relation to China-related PR and brand building. And Sally, perhaps you could introduce our special guest.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Paul, for the kind introduction. And thank you so much, PC, for joining us from very sunny and hot Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia today. So may I briefly introduce our special guest speaker today. So PC is an international marketing professional with over a decade experience in the real estate sector. In his current role as the director of leading real estate companies of the world, PC heads up the global project marketing with a network of more than 550 agencies covering 70 countries in the world. So basically conquering the whole world in that sense. And in his current role, PC is responsible for managing destinations, which is a bespoke marketing program to help design effective marketing developments globally, really leveraging the leading real estate of the world network, especially in China and Asia. So today is really to try to get all the good things from PC and really understand how to market and sell luxury overseas developments to those high net worth individuals and investors in China and Asia. So thank you so much, PC, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. So the first question to you, PC, is what are the key challenges for overseas developers when they are trying to market to the Chinese and Asian potential buyers?
Sure. It's actually a question that has like so many different tenets to it. But if you want me to extrapolate the most important ones, I would say, starting with it's hard to stand out for a lot of developers right now because there is a plethora of choice for the average, Chinese or the average Asian buyer who's commanding properties of a certain value. So just to explain that, say when you're dealing with, say, the wealthy Chinese or wealthy Asian HNI client, and let's say they have $1 million to spend. Now, they could be looking at not just the region or the country that you're based in. They could be looking at properties across the world. Sometimes, I work with developers in different capacities and different agencies across the world. And say, for example, a developer from London comes to Singapore thinking, they're just going to put their market on the property, do a weekend exhibition, and wow, we're going to have about 20 units sold over the weekend with a crowd of about 100 people coming in, or in these days do a virtual expo. But it doesn't work like that anymore. You're not just competing with the same old property developers in the same old region. You're actually competing dollar for dollar across different regions. So right now, say the average Chinese consumer might be looking at up and coming places in Vietnam. They might be looking at saying buying desirable properties in Tokyo. They might be looking at, buying, say, a chalet in Switzerland, or other places. It's not just same places that always appeal to them. So it's very important for developers to understand that they need to do something special to stand out among the crowd. And this doesn't mean just standing out as the digital crowd right now. It's also, when physical events become possible again, is how to do something clever. When you attend, say, mass property events in places like Dubai or London or Singapore or other major places, don't just have a stall, do something special, maybe do some PR activity before you get there. Become a specialist in a certain topic like sustainability or wellness, or work on the lines of a branded residence. Stand out so that people take attention of you. And it's not just the end buyers, but also agents who will help represent you. But that's another thing. Other barriers, of course, one of the biggest thing that I've seen in my years of Asia is language and culture. And sometimes these two go hand in hand, but sometimes they don't. So language is an obvious thing. Sometimes, it's easy, just to take a brochure in English and translate it into Mandarin or translate it into Japanese or another language. But what happens is simply translating it verbatim or just running it through an auto translator, you lose some of the nuances. So it's important to also be cognizant of the culture involved, certain words, certain messages, certain colors, certain numbers that you should not use. For example, whatever happens, don't ever sell a property with the number 4 to a Chinese client, or don't market a property that doesn't have, an appropriate amount of like feng shui elements built in it for the Chinese audience. Or if I'm, say, an Indian client, the same thing applies to things that we call Vastu. It's all built in there. But these are like simple things that I think sometimes developers and agents don't really understand. They go in guns blazing, bam, bam, thinking we're going to conquer the universe. And it just sometimes doesn't work that way. The other last thing that I think right now that is probably becoming a key challenge is, of course, because of the pandemic, there's just been a lack of opportunities for both agents and developers to actually go and actually meet some of these clients face to face, either at events or at one-on-one meetings or in group discussions or so on. At the end of the day, no matter how digital we become, I'm slightly old school, so I believe real estate or the property business is very tactile. It's a very personal business. It's based on relationships. And yes, sometimes these businesses can be done online, the magic of Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp, WeChat, and so on, virtual tours and so on. And sure, some developers could be selling a few properties that way. But I think nothing beats, the rush of actually meeting your clients face to face, answering questions, whether with a translator or not, giving them a walkthrough of the property, explaining the finer points of a, property, not just the interior design, but how everything looks. And clients get a deep sense of comfort in actually meeting a person who is connected with the development. It could be a sales manager, it could be the president of the company. They just want to feel connected. They want to know that there's somebody behind a brand name. And yeah, I think those are probably the 3 or 4 major challenges that I see in today's age.
Cool. So if you're going to drill down into nuts and bolts here, real specifics in terms of PR and marketing and strategies, what would you say are the top 3 strategies that you would go to time and time again?
Instead of 3, can I give you 4 really quickly? Okay, sorry, unlucky in Chinese, but I'll go ahead anyway. So the first one that I always advise developers to do when they're looking on the other side of the planet, and especially when they're coming to Asia, is for the developer to partner with local agencies on the ground. They know what they're doing. They've been dealing with clients for a long time. They speak the same language. They understand what it is that makes their clients tick. They understand what it is that their clients are looking for, how their finances work, how legal, how the legal aspect works in their markets. Work with local agents. You might save a few bucks by going directly, but that's okay. Spend a little bit of money, price your products appropriately, give them the appropriate commission or fee, and work with somebody locally. The second would be embrace local media. And when I say local media, I mean multimedia. Don't just, a lot of people from the West, and I work with a lot of companies in Europe, Australia, and certain markets in North America. A lot of them still haven't appreciated how strong WeChat is in China, or how strong Line Messenger is in Thailand or Japan. I would say embrace these technologies, learn to understand them. And a lot of these apps have, built-in translation capabilities. If you can't understand the system yourself, get somebody local who actually understands how these systems work, but embrace these technologies and start running away from them. And the same way, going across different media, look at different property portals that you can work with. Don't just look at, say, Rightmove in the UK to send your message across in the UK, but actually look at, say, Asia-based property portals like Property Guru or Javai and other such specialists who actually offer you gateway services into China. And I'm not just name dropping, these are companies I know that actually do work as they're intended to. Other thing would be be as visible as possible. Try and keep your name in the news. So for that purpose, hire somebody to do your PR. Stay visible, in some of the daily newspapers if you can. Magazines such as Tatler in Singapore, some of the property blogs across Asia. Work with some of the influencers if you can identify them in the Chinese and the Japanese markets. These are all very, very powerful conduits. And instead of running away from them, I would say embrace them, because the more visible your brand is, the better a chance you have of converting and also gaining new followers as you go along. And the worst thing that a brand can do is not be visible for a significant amount of time, because out of sight, out of mind. It's the simplest thing. And in Asia, things move at the speed of light sometimes. And the last thing that I would say is, and this is a slightly difficult one, but it is something that I've seen a lot of companies starting to embrace, is if you can set up a local office in the country that you intend to do business in. It could be, say, a strategic office, say, located in Beijing or Shanghai if you want to enter the Chinese market. It could be an APAC regional office based in Tokyo or Singapore. But what this does is this shows clients and agents who you might want to work with that you're serious about doing business over there. You're not just coming there over a weekend trying to score a few sales and then run away till your next project comes along. You're there for the long term, so customers can call you. Make it an extension of your overseas. I understand not many companies have the means, but companies can be clever about it by taking up like sort of like a Regis or a shared office sort of a setup over there. Second some of their employees to work as expats for like 6 months or a year, reward them for their APAC assignments or so on, and finally hire some local talent if you have to. But I think all these things really work well for companies who are serious about doing business over here.
If I could just go a bit off piece on that. So you mentioned a number of times, local agents consider opening a local office, hiring local staff. So does that mean that geographically you would suggest kind of going narrow as opposed to broad? So looking at Asia not as a region, but choosing specific cities. Is that what you'd recommend?
Yes, I would actually, because I've spent almost about 10 years in Asia now, working across different markets. And what I've learned is all countries are big countries such as China and India. You could almost decouple them from Asia. You could decouple South Korea and Japan and then treat the rest of Southeast Asia as a separate territory altogether. So you could actually have, say, a central APAC office in Singapore, and that might work very well for the rest of Asia, but you still wouldn't be able to reach the Indian and the Chinese markets effectively.
Yeah.
So you might have to super specialize, and for a developer or a company with deep pockets, that's not a problem. But there are different ways of getting around it. So for example, if you're working in conjunction with an agency, and this is where having a local partner becomes very important, you could always ask them to maybe host one of your employees if you have a deep relationship, say with a company you've been doing business with for a long time. Say, I'm going to send one of my key sales guys or girls, equal opportunity, over to your office for like a year or so. Train your staff up, so that they're comfortable dealing with the inquiries, but then your clients see that we're really serious about your region and so on. So there's different ways of approaching this. But yeah, I would say that the longer you spend time in Asia, the more you realize that just having a single office doesn't really do the region justice. Just like saying that if you have an office in London, you can cater to the Middle East markets equally. Now for the Middle East markets, you need to have an office in Dubai no matter what.
Sure. Yeah, but maybe I can just bring Sally back in, as presumably that kind of more focused approach geographically would make your life easier in terms of PR, because you could connect with local print media and local influencers, or is that not the case? How would you see that?
Yes, I totally agree with what PC said. Very often, sometimes the Western clients say, we can just target those expert magazines or expert media in a local market. It doesn't really work because you are really only limiting yourself to maybe 10,000 people, while instead of 7 million people in the city. So our job is really to help our client to be feasible and go deep in the local market, be really seen as the expert within the local community. In local market. So I think what PC said is so right. Understanding the local media, local culture are absolutely key to success, and set them apart from other Western companies who are only targeting a small number of people. But if they can go local, then they can actually expand their success in that sense.
Cool. And sorry, I'm going to go off piece again, if you don't mind. So in terms of the China market, would it always just be Beijing and Shanghai that you would go for, or would you look at second-tier cities? I mean, how would you look at that? Is there an advantage of being a prominent player in a less popular market?
That's a very good question, because China is a very unique country right now. I mean, we're talking about a country that's essentially set the path to have almost 800 plus cities come up over the next, decade or two. So it's actually remarkable the amount of progress that they've made. Now, to answer your question, right now, a few years ago, it would probably say that even having an office in Hong Kong, you can travel back and forth to mainland China and do business over there and so on. That's no longer the case. And now when we come to the simply having an office in Beijing and Shanghai, you can actually treat Beijing and Shanghai as, mega cities now. Yeah. So those are markets by themselves. So I know some companies that actually have maybe say the head office in Shanghai, but might have a minuscule presence in Beijing and Wales, or basically just have an army of people, or a couple of people that are just always on the road, 5 days a week, 24/7, ready to travel. Right. For a Western company, the dilemma is now, should you set up a company in smaller cities? My answer right now would probably be no, because I think that unless they know that they have a steady stream of clients from certain locations, we could talk about Guangzhou and other locations. I would say you could probably address those locations by having like a Beijing or a Shanghai office for the time being. Once these markets start to develop in the future, you could say, look, I'm covering east of China with, say, Beijing, Shanghai, and these other cities. But as the western part starts to develop and more routes open up, then it makes sense to spread to that part of the country as well. But for now, at least for the next few years, a Beijing or Shanghai presence, I think, should be enough for most companies.
Yeah, makes sense. Is that, would you agree, Sally, or would you have a bolder approach in trying to be in other cities as well in China?
I think it actually depends on the setup, but for the sake of property, then I would agree as well to start with places. I would even be a bit biased to start with Beijing rather than Shanghai, because Shanghai is very competitive and very mature and saturated. And I know that a few Chinese property agency friends here in London, they actually chose Beijing as the office instead of Shanghai for that reason, that Beijing is very chaotic, and when it's chaotic, there's opportunity. So that's what I observed, that people now tend to go to Beijing rather than Shanghai as a starting point.
And can I just add to that, one thing I've learned in the last few years, and to draw parallels between certain cities around the world. So if you guys are familiar with the UAE, you have two unique cities, Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Now, Dubai is the more exciting. It's like where you go clubbing, where you have this, if it's a high school, it's like Dubai is the crazy chemistry lab, where you can do all kinds of crazy experiments and do fun things. Abu Dhabi is like the principal's office. It's more stable. It's there. That's where the rules are made. But that's where the money is. That's where the administration is. So Shanghai and Beijing are sometimes along the same lines. Beijing is a little bit stricter. That's where the government is. It's a little bit slower. It's not as flashy. But also that's where a lot of the old money is. And that's what you want to target. A lot of Shanghai is devoted to the nouveau riche. And you also have a lot of expats there. But if you really want to get into like the old money, you go to Beijing.
Cool. So I'd like to move on to the next question, which is, what are investors looking for in terms of property? And I'd like to sort of angle the question is away from, gold taps and that kind of specification thing. So what are they looking for emotionally? And I know it's a huge generalization, but what is it that you're trying to connect with emotionally when you're designing your PR strategy, your marketing strategy?
So when we're designing a PR strategy, I think the first connection, and again, like I said, I'm old school real estate. So I always believe you always start with the address of the location. You always build it around the location. So if you're doing something with London, whether it's W1, whether it's Wimbledon, whether you're doing something in Manchester, I'm just using the UK as an example. You always have to drive a story around the location first. Location always comes first. Location tells you about the culture, about the amenities, about your distance to different things, your ability to do business in a certain area, your ability to thrive, enjoy life, and so on, educational options. You start from there and you build up your strategy from going on from there. Other than that, I mean, I guess, unfortunately, most PR strategies, after you go past the location part and all of the other frills and amenities and all, it pretty much takes on the same thing. Most of the time, it's all built around the lifestyle or the desirable lifestyle that you could achieve, while living in a certain property or whatever. What I have seen some developers and some agencies recently do is change the rules of the game a little bit, and actually appealing, especially to like Asian and Chinese buyers, while actually talking about the economics upfront. Usually, we're taught in sales never reveal the price, never talk numbers. So a lot of developers that I know now, they're actually flipping that around. They're saying, we're just going to put our numbers first. We're going to we may not put the price front, but we're actually going to tell you that, well, if you invest with us right now, whether you're buying something for, say, flipping it in a few years as an investment, or whether you're buying something to keep and maybe something could be used as an inheritance, you know, our product or our property would do much better than some of the other guys, and here are the facts to support it and so on. And I think another thing that I've also seen developers and other things clearly spin is, instead of just talking about the property, they actually tell stories about themselves. So especially for established sellers that have been around for 20, 30 years, they talk about why the business was started. What is the vision of the business? Was it to do something very different? Was it to design unique architecture, or to design options that didn't really exist at that time, or to provide, you know, like properties for value conscious buyers, or, you know, branded properties for the discerning few. So these are like the few different like PR initiatives that I've seen in the last few years that have been more effective. A lot of it, sorry to say, is pretty much more of the same. There's a lot of copy paste that goes on, but I think if you can think beyond the box and figure out how to make your property, you know, stand out and, like you said, resonate emotionally, there are a few different ways you could go about it.
Yeah. What would you say, Sally, to add to that? I know in previous interviews we've talked about really digging deep and identifying the values and the story and so on, but it is tough to stand out, isn't it, in this market?
Yes, from our experience, when we pitch our clients to those top-end Chinese media, such as Forbes China, General Wealth Management magazines, it's always about the person of the brand. It's not exactly about a particular development that we try to sell, but it's always about the inspirational story of the person, whether they are a developer, architect, or interior designer, really talking about the philosophy, their personal stories, and then use the development as one of the examples. It worked really well. So that's kind of the PR story we have been pitching to media has worked really well. So I would say, yeah, like you said, people don't want to be bombarded with sales pitches, and it's really about, okay, tell me the person behind this development, and then let me see if I like the person or not, and then we talk about, okay, the thing you design or the thing you develop. I think it's all become more personal relationship and chemistry in that sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, Sally, I know you had some follow-on questions as well.
Yes, PC, I would love to know if there are any like particular destinations particularly popular among the Chinese Asian buyers at the moment, and also what do you foresee in the next few years?
Okay, that's a great question, because the list has just become bigger and bigger over the last few years. I would say the UK still holds strong because of many things, you know, Brexit or no Brexit, the UK always holds a soft spot, you know, with a lot of like buyers because of many aspects, whether, you know, they're sending their kids to study in the UK, whether it provides as a gateway to Europe or so on. And also property prices seem to hold really well in the UK, you know, despite the occasional ups and downs in economic cycles. Other than that, I would say that if you go across the EU right now, a lot of like immigration through investment options seem to be coming up in a big way. They've already, you know, taken root, and they're only becoming more popular as time goes by. So I think the three countries that come to mind right now are Portugal, Cyprus, and now Montenegro, which is deemed an EU country in the next few years. So I see a lot of companies offering immigration through investment services specifically for these three countries right now. Other than that, I would say a lot of buyers still flock to Australia because the proximity, it's still technically in APAC, but still offers a little bit of the Western lifestyle. And of course, right now, you know, the country is on hold, but otherwise Australia has a very clear point system defined for anybody who wants to seek out permanent residency otherwise. North America is still popular. A lot of Chinese buyers, a lot of Asian buyers still flock to like Canada and different parts of the US seeking value, seeking residencies, green cards, and so on. And one of the newest destinations that I've seen really picking up in the last few years is actually Dubai. The number of Chinese investors, especially Chinese, Indian investors have always been there for a long time, but the number of Chinese investors has grown exponentially in Dubai over the last few years. And recently, Dubai became one of the first Emirates, one of the first Middle Eastern countries to actually offer a gateway towards citizenship, thereby making it extra popular. And Dubai also, and not to sell Dubai to you guys know about Dubai, but also I think one of the other things driving it, Dubai established various free trade zones many years ago, thereby making it possible for any overseas citizen, any foreigner to establish a local company, and you don't have a local business partner. And you could sponsor your own residency permit, year after year after year. So I think that makes it very attractive for people who are looking to do business in the MENA region as well. So I think these are like my top picks for that will do well in the next few years.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time for this conversation, but it's we've covered a huge amount of ground. So some of the key points that I got that PC mentioned was the need to create the local network. Do partner with local agents, existing local businesses, because it may be tempting to try and go directly, but actually it's harder than you might think to build those relationships, and to some extent to build a local strategy or city strategy. Really interesting discussion about Beijing versus Shanghai, and how to build on either of those or both of those as the kind of platform for China in particular. And then we were talking about brand messages, clearly location being a central point, but also about the brand values. In other words, the individuals, the personalities behind the developer, and presenting that as a consistent story, a consistent set of values, for which each development is just an expression of those values as well. And finally, one really interesting point, or a cluster of interesting points that PC mentioned, was the idea of being really upfront in terms of the financial numbers, maybe return on investments, prospects for capital growth, perhaps rental yields, those kind of things, alongside maybe immigration benefits and other sort of hard-edged benefits that are pretty independent in many ways of the identity of the developer. So with this, I'd just like to say thank you very much, PC, for spending the time with us, for sharing some of your insights. And I'd just like to hand back to Sally to reconfirm the details as to how you can reach out to us if you've listened to these episodes and you've got suggestions as to what else we can cover.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, Paul, and thanks a lot, PC, for your most valuable insights. I'm sure we all learn a lot from you. And if you do have any follow-up questions for PC or about our webinar, please do email to chinamasterclass@11kconsulting.com, or you can find Paul or me on LinkedIn, and you can just drop us a message. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great, I think we're done. Thank you very much indeed, PC. I think it was, I really enjoyed it.
I hope that was okay.
Absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely. So we'll check the recording, cut off the start and this bit at the end, and then we'll be ready to rock and roll.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, guys, and would love to catch up with you, once I actually do get over the vaccinations and all.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you hit the ground at Tunbridge Wells, very nice.
I'll come over to West Sussex, my friend. All right, guys.
Okay.
Take care. Thanks again.
Bye.
All the best. Cheers.
Yeah, be in touch. Bye-bye.